Hello everyone, I'm Chifei Fan. Is China going to attack Taiwan? That's not a question I'm able to answer. However, I can tell you that they are definitely making preparations for an attack. For example, starting in 2020, China has built up military air bases all along its southeastern coast at Longtian, Hui'an, and Zhangzhou. Longtian Air Base in Fujian is less than 160 kilometers from Taiwan. It would take only 7 minutes for a fighter jet to reach us from there. Sometimes it takes longer for an Uber to come to me. Intelligence also indicates that China plans to turn these 3 airports into unmanned drone bases. With the help of AI, they will convert old J-6 bombers into drone bombers, increasing the threat to Taiwan's defenses. Another aggressive move is the PLA's production of the Type 075 amphibious assault ship. What do they need an amphibious assault ship for? We're watching. The Type 075 is classified as a landing helicopter duck. It's too small for fighter jets, but can carry up to 30 helicopters at once. During an amphibious invasion, landing forces on the beach need air support to help neutralize the larger defending army on the ground. Because China is 100 or so kilometers away, flying helicopters back and forth is risky. They have a limited fuel capacity and must spend a lot of time traveling instead of in battle. That's why the Type 075 is crucial. With this floating platform, the PLA can have many mobile bases closer to Taiwan's shores from which they can attack and regroup. Shorter travel times means their helicopters and attack ships spend more time in battle. These ships are obviously built with a potential invasion of Taiwan in mind. The PLA currently has 3 Type 075 ships in service, and 5 more are expected to be launched in the future. With all this military buildup, China is trying to intimidate us. That's why you see news reports of Chinese military planes encroaching the median line in the Taiwan Strait, their aircraft carriers sailing through our waters, and their military conducting amphibious landing simulations. So today, I want to do a thorough analysis to try to answer the question. If Xi Jinping decides to invade Taiwan, how would China conduct the attack? China's first potential strategy is Maritime Blockade. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, it lost tens of thousands of soldiers and thousands of combat vehicles in the process, putting their military in serious trouble. If China can learn anything from Russia, it is don't rush to fight. What's more, China's economy has gotten quite weak in the last few years. If they start a war with Taiwan, it would definitely make things worse. So, you could argue that a blockade is more practical. I don't need to fight. I will just starve you until you surrender. The PLA actually already tried something like this after Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan in 2022, but it only lasted 3 days. What if it went on for longer? Taiwan is an island. We depend on imports for a lot of our daily necessities and raw materials. And when it comes to energy, we have 0 natural gas reserves, but we depend on natural gas. In fact, we will use natural gas for up to 50% of our electricity generation in the future, and 99% of our natural gas is imported by ships. If the PLA starts blocking or sinking these ships, it could lead to a nationwide gas crisis in a very short time. Our natural gas reserves at this moment can last only 11 days. To increase that to 20 days, we will need to build at least 10 more storage tanks. Also, Taiwan is an export economy. If there is a blockade, our ship can leave this island. Montreal would be the first to tank, but soon after, the stock market, foreign exchange, housing markets, widespread capital flight, and soon our economy would collapse. In this scenario, China will win the war without firing a single shot. And it will only take 2 to 3 weeks to coerce Taiwan into surrendering. Quick and easy, right? Not quite. The reality is, most of the experts we consulted do not think China will use this strategy. To explain why, this is military analyst 接种。
中国大陆其实他们一些军官他们在讨论武力犯台作战问题的时候，他们其实不太赞成长期的封锁或围而不打。为什么？第一个，这抵触他们速战速决的指导。因为中国大陆在讨论武力犯台问题的时候，他们一直很在意就是美军的干预，所以他们基本上在计划阶段，他们就想他们是假定美军会干预，所以对于攻台作战本身来讲，一个关键就是要在美军的干预产生足够的影响之前，先在台湾附近创造一个绝对有利的态势。当中共封锁我们的时候，我们的海空军不太可能无所作为，我们的海空军一定会采取挑战的行动。当我们海空军采取挑战行动的时候，原本所谓的封锁其实马上就变成台湾周边制海权跟制空权的交战了，所以状况会迅速的升高，所以不太可能一直停留在这种围而不打的阶段。
Okay, so I guess a maritime blockade is not that likely. China's second potential attack strategy is the lightning offensive. Here, the PLA will start with a missile storm, firing hundreds of missiles to wash the ground clean of key targets. Then, they will airdrop special forces from the sky and land amphibious troops to assault the beaches. At the same time, elite teams of commandos would descend on the capital to decapitate Taiwan's government and paralyze our chain of command. This type of lightning offensive would make it impossible for the United States or any other country to react in time. It would be over in a flash, and the world would be left with no choice but to accept the outcome. Oh my God, should I start writing in simplified characters now? Okay, don't worry. If China could pull this off, they would have done it a long time ago. So why haven't they? Because they can't, of course. The essence of a lightning offensive is that it needs to be sudden and unexpected. Surprise! Like that. That's the only way it can be effective. Taiwan and the neighboring countries cannot know what China is planning to do. The problem is that to achieve a perfect sneak attack, it's not as simple as Xi Jinping saying 1, 2, 3, go, and then they go. It's an enormous and complex operation that requires months of preparation. For example, they must mobilize troops from all over China, halt routine trainings, conduct extensive maintenance and upgrades on military equipment, and prepare medical supplies like beds and blood plasma. Taiwan and neighboring countries are not blind. We will definitely know this. As soon as Taiwan realized that China was preparing to attack, we will start our own preparations as we're members of the international community. This would make it much more difficult for China to succeed in swiftly taking Taiwan and increase the chances of massive civilian casualties. This would make the Taiwanese people turn against their would-be conquerors, and the PLA would need to resort to extreme measures to control and occupy the island. The international community would condemn China for its actions and sanctions would intensify. That's why there has long been a principle circulating in China on this point. Kill as few people as possible. If you have to kill people, kill the soldiers. More importantly, what if Taiwan survives the lightning offensive and the US gets involved and starts sending troops? What would China do then? You might be wondering, if a lightning offensive is so hard to pull off, how did Hamas succeed in attacking Israel in October 2023? Here, we will have General Li Ximing explain the differences. 好，总长先跟我们谈一谈哈，就这一次就是哈马斯攻击以色列，它就是突击成功嘛那在就是中国突击台湾的情况，跟哈马斯突击以色列的情况到底有什么不一样？你可以跟大家解说一下。
这次哈马斯说突击成功，大家是公认事实，连这个非常有名的以色列自己的情报系统都承认他们是彻底的失败。不过我们回头来看看他为什么成功，当然是因为情报工作做得不好嘛。那情报工作我们基本上大概分成几类， 一种就是这种影像的情报嘛，像卫星啊、无人机啊这来造；一种就是电子情报嘛，还有一个是人因情报，就是人来做这些情报。那显然这3个情报它都没有被发现，所以它成功了嘛。那么如果把同样的场景放到台湾海峡来看，在真正要去动手跨过台湾海峡的时候，这种大规模的运动需要很长的时间，然后需要很好的协调合作，在他来讲都不太可能掩盖得住了。除非一种可能情况就是这种很小的规模，比如说他要夺取一个小的外岛，然后这样来这个嚇阻台湾不要独立，或者说去投降了，做这种非常小规模的，那比较有可能。
OK， 好，那讲到情报战的话，这一次哈马斯是不是用了很少的电子通讯的工具？这件事情也蛮关键的。
没有错，他们几乎不用电子通讯工具，因为他知道这个以色列的情报系统电子工具的截听方面都非常到位嘛。他用最传统的这种相互沟通的方式，所有的这个操作运动都在他的地道底下，也就是说，你的影像情报从上面看不见，你想要听他在有些什么沟通，你不知道。那他们这些这个人因的情报里面又没有这些间谍啊被混杂着，所以他很容易就做到成功啦。即使以色列情报系统这么强，他都能够做到。那最主要还是牵涉到它规模没那么大，规模大到一定程度，我们不太可能用原始性的方法来做一些沟通、协调、计划、行动，不太可能。
台湾海峡是不是也让这个突击的困难度高很多？
那当然，你看台湾海峡从100多公里到200-300公里的不等嘛。就算他事前能够掩护得了，那么他开始做这个动作，要跨越这个海峡的过程，还是需要时间呢。在整个时间呢，你不可能完全的整个台湾自己的情报，还有这些友盟的情报完全不管用嘛。我觉得台湾如果这状况比较类比的是乌克兰战争了。乌克兰战争，他当初假借着这个演训的名义，在白俄罗斯，在这个俄罗斯布下重兵的时候，美国那时候已经警告他会动了嘛，只是你不愿意相信而已。我觉得台湾海峡的这种规模，乌俄战争之间的这样子的一种模式比较符合。
所以说，你觉得关键是在，也许我们情报已经获得了，他有在做训练了，他有在调动了，问题是台湾方面可能不愿意接手，他要打了。
没错，有这个可能性嘛。我们看乌俄战争，美国一直事前是都公开的资讯，美国已经说俄罗斯会打，但泽伦斯基本身就不愿意接受这个事情，这是公开的事实。那台湾这种情况之下，我们不愿意接受这是可能的事实，这是非常有可能的。那我们自己要从俄乌战场学到了这些经验教训，我觉得这些东西都要列入我们国家决策阶层，要列入这个经验教训，因为中国这个国家跟我们不一样嘛。你很难预测说他到底真的会做什么，还是不会做什么。所以我们最好的方法是要假设它是有可能的。那这样子的话，我们就会有比较多的时间准备。
那说服台湾民众说他要打了，我觉得政治上恐怕蛮困难的。我觉得就是说总统要说好，这个中共要打来了。
我觉得还好嘞，因为你是准备嘛。就有这种情况，我们要加强准备，我们要赶快要救部位，加上，但是你不要去渲染说他一定会打来。也就是说，我们做好最周全的准备，我们希望是最好的结果，但是我们做最糟状况的准备，我觉得还是可以做了，并不见得说一定在政治上面不正确就完全不能做。
The third strategy for China's attack is a hybrid approach, ending in a full-scale invasion. Here, they will start with gray zone tactics. They are more like harassment than engagement. Instead of an actual blockade, China might use sneakier methods, like conducting military exercises in the waters around Taiwan while imposing a no-fly zone there. They might start patrolling international waters and inspecting ships that get close to Taiwan. In particular, they might start interfering with the cargo ships carrying Taiwan's natural gas supply. These measures would not immediately cut off our gas, but they would have a strong psychological impact on people. The tanks we store our natural gas in are huge. They are easy targets. They can't really be concealed. Here, China might start bombing our gas tanks, which would create huge explosions that will also demoralize the public. Next comes a missile storm. China will fire medium and long-range missiles at our key military and political institutions and infrastructure. Targets will include barracks, airports, ports, highways, local governments, central governments, and key agencies. At the same time, they will send in their Navy and Air Force to neutralize our Navy and Air Force. Once our defenses are weakened, the PLA would then mount a full-scale invasion. Here, they would mobilize the Type 075 amphibious assault ship we talked about earlier. And where would they attack in this scenario? Based on Taiwan's geography and societal patterns, many military experts say that their highest priority is the northwest coast of Taiwan, from Danshui and Bali to Guanyin and Dayuan. This is because we have Taipei Harbor in the north and Taoyuan International Airport in the south. The distance between these 2 points is only a 30-minute drive. These targets are not only two of Taiwan's most important transportation hubs, they are also civilian rather than military hubs. This means there are fewer troops and military equipment there, making them easier to attack. Taking these hubs is critical to the PLA's strategy because even with a Type 075, their helicopters and landing crafts are limited in how many troops and equipment they could carry. As long as our military is well prepared, we can still overwhelm their limited numbers of attack troops with our much larger force on the ground. However, if they are able to break through our defenses and take over key infrastructures like the harbor and airport, we will be in serious trouble. Instead of the combat offloading they can achieve with helicopters and landing craft, they will be able to perform more traditional full-scale offloading at the airport and harbor, which is at least 10 times more capacity than combat offloading. Let's give an example. If helicopters can bring 10 troops at a time, after taking Taoyuan Airport, the PLA will use transport planes to bring in 100 troops at a time. If landing craft can bring 10 troops at a time, then after taking Taipei Port, they could use large ships to bring in 100 at a time, and they would keep coming and coming and coming. To sum up this strategy, the PLA's attack on Taiwan will start with gray zone tactics, followed by missile strikes and naval and air force attacks. Then, they will start a full-scale invasion by seizing key targets so they can transport troops to Taiwan until we give up. So now we know how the enemy will attack. Next, we should probably figure out how we can defend and counter these attacks. And that is the topic for our next video, where we analyze what Taiwan can do to prepare for invasion. If you find this video helpful, please leave a comment and let us know your thoughts. If you are in a hurry, you can also just give us a like. 2027 is coming. Let's be vigilant together. I'm Chifei Fan. See you next time. This video is in collaboration with TaiwanPlus.